Welcome to the Denver Gazette Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Schmedeke. And today we're brought to you by Applewood Plumbing, Heating, and Electric. They have been serving Denver residents for 50 years. They are the proud sponsor of the Colorado Avalanche and the proud sponsor of this podcast. And on this edition of the podcast, we're going to check in with Vinny Benedetto to talk about the Denver Nuggets. Vinny, how are you today?
Doing well. How are you doing?
Pretty well. Better than the Nuggets were last night. We'll say that. We don't need to focus too much on last night's game. I kind of want to talk more big picture and the upcoming, whatever our thoughts are on the in-season tournament. We'll go from there as well. But last night kind of seemed almost like a little bit of a scheduled loss. How did you see it?
Yeah, and it felt like Minnesota came into that game saying, we want to show these guys that we're a different team than we were in the playoffs last year. And to their point, I think they are a different team. I think Jaden McDaniels made a big difference in that game. I think Naz Reid made an impact on that game. Neither of those guys were available for the playoff series last year, and so I think that was part of what bothered the Nuggets last night is the addition of those guys. Size was certainly an issue, and just given the Nuggets schedule where what was it, back-to-back late last week, travel back for a game, or I guess Sunday, Monday was the back-to-back, and then you travel to Minnesota for a game Wednesday, then you travel back probably late last night to get back for another back-to-back coming up Friday and Saturday. So yeah, I think kind of the early season schedule just maybe caught up to the Nuggets a little bit, or maybe they were feeling themselves after that 4-0 start.
So I heard Coach Malone on altitude today, and he of course did not blame the schedule. He blamed other things. I think the thing I noticed the most was the starters just did not seem engaged at all last night.
Yeah, and it was interesting because, Nikola was at least aggressive early on. It felt like he was he kind of stepped up and said, all right, if no one else is going to do it, I'll do it. Jamal, I think, didn't make a field goal in the first half. They got to find a way to get Michael Porter Jr., I think, more involved in the offense, especially against a team like Minnesota where they're just the length and size is so bothersome. I think you got to find a way to find Mike in a corner and let him get a couple of shots up, see if you can stretch that defense out a little bit. And then, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who was almost infallible defensively through the first 4 games, I think had his toughest night dealing with Anthony Edwards. So, yeah, I think it was just it was a combination of multiple factors. I think the schedule is certainly a small part of it. And I think, to your point, I think the bench was largely okay yesterday. I wouldn't put that loss on the bench, like we might have done at times last year. But I think the combination between busy schedule, lots of travel, and just the starters not bringing it from the jump, I think caught up with the Nuggets last night for sure.
I was going to ask you about Michael Porter Jr. Is it? I know we don't want to panic with the guy yet, but it seems his offensive game is just not there.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think on our first podcast this season, you asked me if I was concerned about his shooting, and I was pretty adamant that I was not. Yeah. And I still, Michael Porter Jr.'s shot is one thing I'm not going to fret over still. But I think there was an encouraging development. And I can't remember exactly. I think it was probably the OKC game on Sunday where we saw a little bit of him staggering with the second unit.
Yeah.
And I think, we've talked about this since I think last playoffs. I would love to see more of him at the 4, especially in a game like last night where they're letting Rudy Gobert kind of roam off the ball. They're almost daring Aaron Gordon to shoot when they're doing that. So I wouldn't hate it if they went Mike at the 4, bring Julian Strawther in off the bench, let him play a little bit with the starters, and just put more shooting out there to make the Timberwolves, space their defense out a little bit, or let Mike play with the second unit where he could have a little bit more offensive freedom or a little bit more ability to explore his game. So I think there's certainly some juice left to squeeze out of Michael Porter Jr.'s game so far this season.
So I just went to ESPN.com while we're talking. I don't know. Did you see this big story on Jokic on their front page?
I saw it on the front page. I haven't clicked on it yet.
I just clicked on it now, and it just the headline just says, there's a quote that says, he's Beethoven, how Nikola Jokic became the best passer in NBA history. So I will definitely have to check that out after we're done here. But it's by Baxter Holmes. So it's probably pretty in-depth. We don't even need to talk about Nikola Jokic. He does what he needs to do, and we're good there. Let's talk about the bench, because you and I were raving about Peyton Watson on Twitter during that Oklahoma City game. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's up and down. You can tell that he's a very young player, but he adds something to that second unit that I don't think they've had in the past.
Yeah, it's the weird. He's like the versatile defender, but it's not just ones and twos. Like I think he can get to a point. Well,
Nas Reed owned him last night.
yeah, I was gonna say maybe I was gonna say he can be a guy who could switch 1 through 4, but Nas Reed was a lot to handle last night. But just so I think he's at a point where he can probably switch 1 through 3 right now, maybe smaller, less traditional fours. But just the kind of shot blocking ability is something that you don't. He's got a rare ability to block shots, and he's got a long wingspan. But for a guy who might be best as a 2 or a 3, and then the cutting and the finishing around the rim, I think might be where he's improved most this season. And so yeah, I think that's just a pretty rare combination to have a guy that can recover for block shots like that. It's effective in transition, good around the rim. So I think he's got a lot of really intriguing pieces to his game. I think it's going to take probably the rest of this season and maybe even next season for it all really to come together. I think, what I've said about Christian Braun this year in terms of wanting him to either be a better spot up shooter or just a little bit better attacking closeouts. I think that might be the next part of Peyton's game, specifically his shooting, because I think he's already pretty solid at attacking closeouts.
Yeah.
But he has a unique blend of skills that the Nuggets will need to find a way to utilize.
Yeah, and he's like you said, he seems to cut better this year. Like there's been times and he's out there with Jokic and some of the starters, so that's been nice. Another guy I want to talk about with the bench has got to be Zeke. Another guy he may be able to switch 1 through 5. He's got great. They were raving about his feet on the broadcast yesterday, yep. But when he's healthy, he is a solid contributor for that Nuggets bench.
Yeah, and I think you're right that he can switch 1 through 5, and I think I feel better about that this year than I have in any previous years. In previous years, it was more felt like he can switch 1 through 4, and like Peyton going up against Nas Reed, Zeke would struggle against a real big-bodied 5. But I think we've seen numerous instances this year. I think there was one sequence where I think he, went body to body with Jaren Jackson Jr. in Memphis and blocked a shot. And then Monday here, he grabs an offensive rebound in a crowd and goes up for a dunk over Walker Kessler, who's one of the best, like rim protecting young bigs. So I think Zeke's kind of, I don't know if it's a physical development or if it's more mentally buying into the idea of being a 5, that he belongs, in the paint and can body some of these traditional 5s. Malone has been really complimentary of his work ethic this year. He's really pleased with how hard Zeke is playing. So yeah, if I still don't know how much I buy the change in the shooting mechanics. I think it almost looks a little funkier now than it did beforehand.
Yeah.
But I'll leave that to them. They know more about shooting a basketball than I do, certainly. But yeah, I think with Zeke, the key things are going to be anchoring that second unit defense where they're going to switch everything. So he's got to be able to guard just about anybody who the second unit is going up against. Because I think the work ethic is going to stay high. So if he can continue to rebound at a decent level, I think the second unit will really be in pretty decent hands.
Well, and he seems to be developing a little bit of chemistry on the pick and roll with Jamal Murray on that second unit, which I think there are times, and we've talked about this, and we've heard that the second unit sometimes is like, here, Jamal, go do what you need to do. And that's not going to work.
Yeah, it's like the starters play the most beautiful basketball you've ever seen, and then the bench comes in and it's just the opposite end of the spectrum, where it's just like, let's play defense and make this really gritty. But yeah, one of the things that Malone cited when he was talking about Zeke's improvement from last year to this year has been like being a better screener and being a better dribble handoff guy, which is, I'll admit, not something that I probably would have picked up on.
Yeah.
But is a really important part of that second unit, because I think it's just going to be part of that group's identity, where there are going to be nights where their best offense is going to be give the ball to Jamal and let him just kind of cook. Obviously, that wasn't a recipe for success last night. It wasn't Jamal's best night last night. But if there are nights where that second unit is really struggling to either force turnovers or get stops and get out and run in transition, Yeah, I think giving the ball to Jamal and letting him figure it out is going to probably be that group's best bet in the half court for quite a while, unless somebody takes a big step up.
What have you seen from Reggie Jackson so far? Seems like he's just been kind of solid.
Yeah, and like I think maybe I've said this here or elsewhere before. I think the biggest thing for Reggie was to have that full off season, full training camp, full preseason. He told me I think after the opener that he's just so much more comfortable. He has a better understanding of where his shots are going to come from, and I think that is allowing him to shoot it at a much higher level than we saw during his short time with the Nuggets last season. I think this year he's going to be back to his regular, high 30% self from three. I think that's important for the second unit because I think we've seen teams dare Christian Brown to shoot three. I think so far this season. Peyton Watson's another guy where teams will probably let him get a couple up. And if he makes his first few, then they'll start to guard him differently. But as it stands, Julian Strother still feels like he's like a half member of the second unit. He's not like a fully earned that job yet. So they need Reggie to keep defenses honest in that second unit so far. And I think just his increased level of comfort has allowed him to shoot it better so far this season. I think we could see a little bit more. Malone has said he wants Reggie to be more of the point guard in that group to get Jamal off the ball a little bit during his time with that group. So I think the half court stuff could use a little work in terms of him initiating the offense with that group. But I just think like it was last year, I think the half court offense for that unit is going to be a work in progress so far.
Yeah, and so Minnesota was daring Aaron Gordon to shoot yesterday too. I'm sure you saw that they were sagging off him. He was not good last night. I guess that's all we can really say.
Yeah, and I guess that's part of why I wouldn't mind seeing Michael Porter Jr. slide to the four. Like,
yeah,
if there are nights when, Mike doesn't play, I think there should be nights where other guys, have reduced minutes if the matchup isn't well suited to their skill sets. So and that felt like kind of what we saw last year at times when everyone made a big deal after that first Philadelphia regular season game where they kind of had Joel Embiid roam off of Aaron and let PJ Tucker guard Nikola with Joel providing backup. So it's not, I wouldn't say what Minnesota did last night was anything new. I'd say the Nuggets attacked it suboptimally, I'll put it that way. So not. I think it's tough for Aaron to really figure out where he should be when teams are doing that. But yeah, I think if you put Mike at the four and just let him space it out, like I don't know what a team is supposed what they do in terms of, are you going to have Rudy Gobert just roam the middle of the floor when Mike's in a corner?
Yeah. Last night reminded me how much I hate when they play the Timberwolves. They're kind of whiny, like they're very whiny, and I tweeted that I forgot that Karl Anthony Towns has never committed a foul in his life.
Yeah, well,
and they were like that in the playoff series too. Like, I mean, I think the Nuggets were just much better than they were, but
yeah, between Rudy, Cat, and Nikola, it's got to be a tough night for officials.
Yeah,
I don't know if any of those guys like many of the calls that go against them.
All right, so let's move on. The Dallas Mavericks are in Denver tomorrow night. Dallas is 4-0. I'm just looking at their schedule. I mean, they beat the Bulls. They beat Memphis, who was definitely not playing well. Brooklyn at home, and then they played Wemby in his first game and beat them. But this is also the in-season tournament that you and I haven't really talked about. So let's just start with that. What are your thoughts on this in-season tournament?
Yeah, I've gone back and forth. I thought
you're a big soccer guy, though, so you probably kind of understand it.
Kind of, but the NBA's use of an in-season tournament is different because, like in soccer, where you have these different competitions, there's no double dipping where it's either a league match or a cup match. Yeah. There's no, whereas in the NBA, the way they're doing it is the in-season tournament counts as a regular season game, but it also counts towards this in-season tournament. I don't know. I don't think there's any workaround to prevent that. Otherwise, you'd have to have an in-season tournament. You'd have to add, 7 or 8 games to at least the teams that are playing in the final. But yeah, that's something they just deal with in soccer. If you're playing if you're making a deep cup run, that kind of de-emphasizes some of your league matches. But here they're going to count for both. So I think it's intriguing. I think, at first I wasn't a big fan, but then you get kind of, for the casual fan, there's this kind of sense that the NBA season starts on Christmas Day, and then it really starts, once the NFL playoffs are kind of going. So I think this is a good way to kind of keep people engaged earlier in the season. I could do without those courts are brutal.
Yeah.
But then
there's a lot going on there.
Then I also had the thought of, if I'm a casual fan and I turn on the TV tomorrow night and I see, oh, why is that funky? Why are they playing on that funky court?
Yeah.
And then you realize, oh, it's because this is the in-season tournament and this is different. Maybe that's an easy way to differentiate that these Tuesday and Friday night games are something separate than just the standalone regular season games. I think I've come around a little bit more on the in-season tournament than I did when it was first released, but it still feels a little clunky or a little forced. So maybe that's something that'll just erode with time. But yeah, I'm interested to see how it goes. I don't know if teams are really going to approach it any differently. Like, I don't think so.
Well, Malone said on the radio today, we're playing Dallas at home tomorrow. so I think but I think the knockout part will be much more interesting. I think it'll be interesting to see NBA teams in like that one and done kind of situation. I think that will be more fun. But yeah, if they didn't tell me, I don't think I would know that. I mean, and work in this business, but
Right.
I wouldn't know like, oh, tomorrow's the first day of group play or whatever it is.
Right. Yeah, that's the only reason I think the funky courts might be a good idea, but I'll have to bring Tylenol or something because it might give me a headache looking at it tomorrow night.
It's very blue, right?
It's very blue.
Yes. And that's another thing. Like, how much did they ask these owners? I mean, these owners have too much money, but oh hey, we need a new court for 4 games a year. So let's talk a little bit about Dallas. I just looked up their stats. Luka is doing Luka things. He's 33, 10, and 9, almost a triple double. He's 9.8 on assists. They just have Kyrie Irving, and I just always wonder how long it lasts for them.
Yeah, and Dallas, I think I maintained this last year when we were doing these, looking at potential playoff matchups. Dallas just isn't, if I'm Denver, Dallas just isn't a team that scares me. I think
they don't have anyone to guard Jokic at all.
No, their best bet is like 18, 19-year-old Derek Lively, a rookie at a Duke, and Derek Lively's been really good, I think, so far this season. But like we saw with Chet Holmgren, the rookies, I mean, you're just too young and probably too slight to have much to bother Jokic. But I think just the Dallas matchup as a whole, I think really suits Denver pretty well. I like Aaron Gordon on Luka and KCP on Kyrie. And I mean, Kyrie is one of those guys where if he's got it going, it doesn't really matter the defender in front of him. But I think Aaron Gordon is just built in a way that allows him to make things as hard on Luka as possible, as long as he, avoids foul trouble.
I've just know that the Kyrie's only played in 2 of the 4 games already.
Yeah, I think he missed, was it maybe the first 2 or
okay.
He's got like a foot thing, or maybe it was the last 2. He's got some sort of foot thing that he's been dealing with. So
okay.
I think we'll see an injury report for the first time here in a couple hours. So yeah, that'll certainly be something to monitor.
Yeah, I think that really we all have decided that they got Aaron Gordon for games like this to guard Luka. We talked about it in the past, to guard Kawhi when he actually plays, things like that. So yeah, you're right. It's a good match. They always play really good games too. They're usually pretty entertaining games, and so yeah, I'll be excited. Then the Bulls are here on Saturday. The Bulls are kind of a mess, but it's still a back-to-back. So I mean, what do you expect? A lot of bench in that Saturday game, probably.
Yeah, I would say so. But the Bulls are also one of those teams that
win
always.
Here.
What's that?
They win here. They come here and win.
Yeah, and I think part of it is, we get a lot of Midwest transplants out here. I'm one of them. Not that I grew up a Bulls fan by any means, but the Bulls always have a solid representation in the crowds here. And on the other end of the Aaron Gordon guarding Luka Doncic, I think DeMar DeRozan is oddly one of the guys who gives Aaron Gordon a little bit of trouble just because he's got all of the pivots and shot fakes, and he's so good in the mid-range game where it's he for whatever reason is a guy who I feel like always has good games against the Nuggets.
Yeah.
But the Bulls are in an interesting spot. They had a players only meeting after their first game of the season. So I think they might be a little I guess fragile might be the word, where it's just like I don't know how long the Bulls go without a change if things continue on the path they're going right now. It just feels like they've got a lot of redundant talents. They've got a few really good defensive guards like Caruso, Javon Carter. I think Ayo's a pretty solid defender. Then they've got, the two wings that Levine and DeRozan, who I think can play together, but it just feels like they haven't optimized their roster. So yeah, Chicago's in an interesting spot to start the season, but Denver will be on the second night of a back-to-back against an Eastern Conference team. So if they had to de-emphasize one of these two games, Friday and Saturday, I'd certainly think it'd be the Bulls game.
Well, I remember the Bulls came into Denver last year and smacked the Nuggets around pretty good, if I remember right. And you know what? The Bulls are a team that the NBA wants to be good. I think that, that's a market that they want people to care about. And so, but that kind of ties into my last question for you, because I've heard Zach LaVine's name floated out there to possibly go to Philly in a trade because of all of their draft picks. So does James Harden going to the Clippers mean anything, especially to the Nuggets?
It's a really good question. I don't. I mean,
I say no. I just feel like he's whatever. I don't know. Like I don't like him. I've never liked his style. It's never been my thing.
Yeah.
So I'm always like, cool. He'll keep the ball away from their best players. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, and I've gone back and forth on this because, like, in a vacuum, giving up, I don't feel like the Clippers gave up a lot outside of the draft compensation.
Yeah.
It was a lot of veteran players who can fill salary to match Harden. So it was like, in a vacuum, is it better to have James Harden than it is to have the three guys they gave up? Probably
Marcus Morris, who wasn't even playing.
Right. Nick Batum, who was starting, but
yeah,
feels pretty replaceable, especially when you get PJ Tucker back. So yeah, between Russ and James Harden, they've played together before. It hasn't gone well.
Yeah.
So I think the Clippers got marginally better, but to have the whole Western Conference shaken up because they got James Harden, a guy who, for various different reasons, hasn't really been an impact guy in the playoffs. I don't think the Nuggets or any other team with plans on making the Western Conference Finals are shaking in their boots because the Clippers got James Harden.
Well, and again, we all know that their whole thing is health, and are those guys going to stay healthy? The evidence is no, they're not. So, I mean, the one year they were healthy is when the Nuggets beat them in the bubble. So, I mean, that's a completely different team. I mean, but yeah, I just, I saw that ESPN graphic, which I'm sure you saw going around, that the Clippers were now favored to win the West. And I don't know. I think the Nuggets just go about their business and don't worry about that stuff.
Yeah, and I think that might have been one of ESPN's kind of funky metrics that they do on their own, like the basketball predictor. And I don't know what they call it, but because then I went and looked at all the different sports books, and the sports books didn't react as aggressively as ESPN did. So yeah, I don't know if that was trying to drum up some headlines or try to get some eyeballs, or if that was one of their standalone metrics say. But if that's what the metrics say, I think you might need to go back and look at the formula, because there are a few teams that I would put comfortably ahead of the Clippers still in the Western Conference.
And is that the same metric they used? Didn't Kevin Pelton say the Nuggets were going to win like 45 games or something like that? He had some weird prediction where they were in the 40s for wins.
Yeah, I didn't see that, but yeah.
But he predicted Memphis to win 50, and we see how that's going.
Yeah, that might be another formula that needs some tinkering, because yeah, the Grizzlies look sorry. And like Ja Morant coming back in 20 games will certainly help a lot, but how big of a hole are they going to have to dig themselves out of 25 games into the season?
And how like Morant will be fresh, but he hasn't played an NBA game since last year's playoffs. So I'm sure that's, and who knows where his head's at. I mean, we don't know, but
Right.
I just don't. I mean, the Nuggets got all they could handle from them in Memphis, but that's just a tough place for the Nuggets to play. It always is. All right, Vinny, that's all I got for you today. Thanks for coming on and talking. You will be at the blinding blue court tomorrow watching the Nuggets and Mavs. 8 p.m. tip over at Ball Arena. Games on ESPN and Altitude. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast on Apple or Spotify. And check out all of Vinny's work and everybody else's work over at denvergazette.com. And Vinny, we will catch up with you next week.
Sounds good. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.